anyone that follows me closely on Twitter or on YouTube knows that I give a lot of importance to the question of what a person's personal assessment is that UFOs are stemming from non-human intelligence, or at the very minimum that they comprise of extraordinary technology. And I always phrase it in terms of probability. Now, the thing about it is every one of us allots a probability to whether or not UFOs are stemming from non-human intelligence. And we all do it whether we're willing to admit it or not. If someone is committed to the position, well, I don't really know and I'm not going to allot a probability, then they're probably not entrenched in this subject. Now, a good rule of thumb to get a ballpark of what someone's probability number is on whether UFOs are derived from non-human intelligence or not is just to look at how they approach the subject. Mick West has recently tweeted that he is 99.9999% sure the UFOs are not stemming from non-human intelligence. Now, I don't think that's a revelation or a surprise to anyone based upon how he approaches the subject, which is he is entrenched in debunking the subject. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's a lot of benefits to that. But my point is that by just seeing how he engages the subject reveals easily, at least in a ballpark fashion, what probability he gives to UFOs coming from non-human intelligence. Now, I'm sure if you looked at me, you'd probably say I'm fairly convinced that UFOs stem from non-human intelligence. And in actuality, my figure is above 50%. And I'm not willing to give an exact figure on the probability that I give to UFOs being of non-human intelligence is because I can't. And my feelings fluctuate. But I would say that I'm definitely over 50% that some UFOs are stemming from non-human intelligence. And I think that's not a surprise to anyone because I'm persistently harping on the importance of the U.S. government providing more information on what they know about UFOs. Now, so why is probability important? Why is it important to know or to try to ascertain the probability a particular individual gives to UFOs stemming from non-human intelligence? And the reason it's important, in my opinion, is because if we as a collective civilization and our institutions as well predominantly committed to UFOs being of non-human intelligence is relegated to 1 in 50,000 chance or 1 in a million chance, then it's no mystery that no one is striving to actually investigate UFOs. I mean, I'm not going to investigate whether Santa Claus exists or not. And if I saw world institutions trying to do so, I would not only scoff at it, I would criticize them for it. Same goes with the spaghetti monster and many, or leprechauns or other fictitious things people believe exist, which almost certainly don't. Now, there's a leprechauns could exist. The spaghetti monster could exist, but it's unlikely. But I see the problem with our civilization is I think we are prone to put UFOs under that same umbrella. And I would say that that is a huge logical error on our behalf because the evidence for UFOs existing far surpasses fictitious entities such as leprechauns or the spaghetti monster or Santa Claus. So that's why I like to ask people what probability they give to it. Now, I will grant you that the probability we allot is subjective. That's absolutely true. But on the other hand, the probability debunkers allot is also subjective. The probability that skeptics allot is also subjective. They don't have a monopoly on logic and rationality. They may believe they do. They may be completely convinced that their approach to the subject is the most rational one. I disagree. But nevertheless, this is indeed a debate because no one has been able to establish their position as intrinsically the most rational. And someday we will be able to do that, in my opinion. If disclosure ever happens and it gets established that some UFOs did stem from UFO intelligence, then the smartest circles among us will dive into the historical record and try to make the most educated assessment they can on who was being most objective and who was being most rational. Now, the reason we can't do it now is the same reason that if someone's, let's say they're a shooting guard and playing basketball, in the midst of the game, they may be convinced they're the best player on the court. But in all actuality, to truly get the most accurate perspective on who was the best player, we're going to have to wait until the game is over, and then we're going to have to look at footage, and we're going to have to truly analyze the situation. And that's the only way we're going to get as close to certainty as we possibly can on who exactly was the most rational and was the most objective. But right now, we're in the game, kid. We are in the game. The game. And we're all placing our bets. And we're all making our arguments. And that's the way it is. And that's my perception. Now, to prevent any misinterpretation of what I'm saying, I'm not saying that the skeptic or the debunker is the enemy. That's not what I'm saying. In fact, they may be right. They may be the most rational of people who are approaching this subject. I don't know. I just call it like I see it and let the chips fall where they may. And like I said earlier in this video, I do think debunkers serve a purpose. For one, they help us to see the subject how a lot of other people see it, and in ways we may not see it, people like me. And also, because of their inherent biases, they may uncover inconsistencies or problems with some of the evidence in ways that, quote unquote, believers like me wouldn't. So we kind of complement each other because we're both inherently biased. And there's also overlap. I'm sure some people would consider me a skeptic, frankly, because there's a lot of components of the UFO literature that I do not subscribe to, and I think the evidence is absolutely terrible. And I get pretty upset when I hear so many people believe in tenets of this literature that have terrible evidence, like the TR-3B, for example, which as far as I know, was a mythology started by Edgar, I think that's his name, Edgar Fouché. Forgive me if I'm getting his name wrong or mispronouncing. It started with him, and later down the line, he was on Alien Scientist's YouTube channel, or at least Alien Scientist took footage of him and uploaded it to his YouTube channel, in which he stated that he lied about the story. And yet, to this day, when anyone mentions an unidentified triangular craft, you get people saying, oh, that's a TR-3B. It's like, were you even there? How do you know it's a TR-3B? Furthermore, the evidence for the existence of the TR-3B is not really good. Now, there may be anomalous triangular-shaped craft that have been produced by militaries, but it's probably not the TR-3B. It would probably be something else. As it stands now, the only evidence we have for UFO reality is evidence that is open to interpretation, at least in the public domain. And so therefore, our interpretation of the value of the evidence is indeed subjective. On the other hand, I would argue very strongly that some interpretations of the evidence are more rational and objective than others. But that is a subject and an assessment that is not going to be able to be given a whole lot of finalization until the game is over, as it were. This brings me to a quote Elizondo has made, Luis Elizondo. I think this is the quote. If I'm wrong on it, then someone can chastise me. But it basically goes like this. The first time, this is a quote that has been popularized within the intelligence community. The first time something happens, that's unusual. It's an anomaly. The second time, maybe it's a coincidence. And the third time, it's a trend. And so I think the historical UFO record falls squarely under the trend umbrella. And a retort to this could be, well, look, you gullible boy, you. Listen, if you see someone entering a house and 30 minutes later, the person in that house was murdered, you cannot assume that the person that entered the house was the perpetrator. And to that, I would say, you're absolutely right. I would be going way too far to make that assumption. On the other hand, if you take 100 cases where someone enters a house and 30 minutes later someone is murdered, within that light, I would say there's a good probability that at least one of those people who entered the house in which someone was killed 30 minutes later, the person that entered the house was likely the perpetrator, at least one out of those 100. And I think this is a great metaphor for the evidence we have for UFOs and the commonality and the patterns that have emerged with great consistency over many decades. And that's why I am a believer, frankly. I am not a believer because of one incident here or one incident there. I am a believer based upon the preponderance of the evidence. And it is my assessment that the more cases that come forward, the more patterns that emerge, and the more highly corroborated cases in particular that come forward, the more likely UFOs are not prosaic in nature. And that is why I am over 50% that they are not prosaic in nature. So I'm going to end this video asking you, my audience, what probability do you give that, number one, UFOs are of non-human intelligence, and number two, that they are of extraordinary technology? Now, the latter could be true, and it also could be stemming from human civilization. And you can give me your answer in the comments below. I look forward to reading those answers. And if you'd like to support my work, I have a Patreon, I have a YouTube membership. I also have a merch shop. All those links are below. Or you can just slap a like on this bad boy, and I will appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.